The package looked innocent enough, a forgotten backpack near the cafe's front window. But when David examined the contents more closely, he recognized the signature of an improvised explosive device designed for maximum casualties. The customers sipping their morning coffee had no idea their barista was the same person who'd earned 3 Bronze Stars for defusing bombs under enemy fire. Welcome to Secret Human Stories. Before I tell you this incredible story of hidden expertise and life-saving vigilance, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most dangerous threats are neutralized by people who learn to recognize them in the world's most hostile places. David Chen was everything the residents of Millbrook wanted in a neighborhood barista. At 35, he had the perfect combination of technical coffee skills and genuine warmth that made Corner Café the social hub of their small downtown district. For 3 years, he'd been crafting perfect espresso drinks, remembering every regular customer's order, and creating the kind of welcoming atmosphere that made people want to start their day with a visit to his cafe. The morning regulars at Corner Café had their routines built around David's reliability. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 7:15 for her medium cappuccino with an extra shot. Dr. Rodriguez stopped by at 7:45 for his large Americano before hospital rounds. The college students from nearby Millbrook University treated David's counter as their informal office, studying over lattes that he'd refill without being asked. David had an unusual talent for making each customer feel like the most important person in his day. He remembered personal details, asking about job interviews, celebrating promotions, offering encouragement during difficult times. Parents brought their children to meet the nice man who made the special hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Teenagers trusted David with their relationship problems and college application stress. But there was something about David Chen that nobody at Corner Café could have imagined. The steady hands that created perfect latte art had once defused improvised explosive devices while insurgent snipers aimed at his position. The calm demeanor that handled morning rush crowds had once been essential for bomb disposal work where a single mistake meant death for him and everyone nearby. From 2008 to 2020, Staff Sergeant David Chen had served with the Army's 52nd Explosive Ordnance Disposal Battalion, specializing in improvised explosive device disposal in urban combat environments. For 12 years, he'd been the person called when suspicious packages, roadside bombs, and terrorist devices threatened American forces and civilian populations in Iraq and Afghanistan. David's military record was exceptional even among EOD specialists. 412 explosive devices successfully neutralized, including 67 vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices and 23 suicide vest bombs. His success rate was 100%. In 12 years of bomb disposal, he'd never lost a device, never failed to neutralize a threat, and never allowed a bomb to detonate while under his control. He had earned 3 Bronze Stars, the Army Commendation Medal, and the Combat Action Badge. But David's specialty hadn't been routine bomb disposal. His unique expertise was what EOD professionals call render-safe procedures in populated areas, situations where explosive devices threatened civilian populations and required precision techniques that could neutralize threats without causing evacuations or panic. These missions demanded technical expertise combined with the ability to work invisibly, defusing bombs while maintaining the appearance of normal daily activities. The psychological demands of EOD work were extraordinary. Every device David approached could be his last. Every wire he cut could trigger an explosion that would kill him and nearby civilians. The responsibility was overwhelming, the technical challenges constant, and the knowledge that terrorist bomb makers were specifically targeting EOD technicians added layers of stress that few people could handle. David's decision to leave military service in 2020 hadn't been about burnout or incompetence. It had been about finding peace. After 12 years of knowing that each day might involve defusing bombs designed to kill him, he'd wanted a quiet life where the most dangerous thing he'd handle would be hot espresso steam. Opening a coffee shop had seemed like the perfect transition, using his attention to detail and calm under pressure in an environment focused on creating comfort rather than preventing explosions. For 3 years, David had successfully convinced himself that his EOD skills were relics of a former life, that the hypervigilance and technical expertise he'd developed were unnecessary in his peaceful cafe environment. He'd learned to ignore his automatic scanning for suspicious packages, to suppress his instinctive analysis of potential bomb placement locations, and to focus on creating the perfect morning coffee experience for customers who had no idea of his explosive ordnance background. But some skills don't retire, even when the person carrying them tries to. And on Wednesday morning, November 6th, during what should have been a routine day at Corner Café, those skills would prove that some vigilance never ends. It just waits quietly until the moment it's needed to save innocent lives. The morning had started normally. David was preparing for the 8 a.m. rush, grinding fresh beans, heating the espresso machine, and arranging pastries in the display case. Corner Café was beginning to fill with its usual mix of commuters, students, and retirees who treated David's establishment as their informal community center. At 8:23 a.m., David noticed the backpack near the front window. Initially, it seemed unremarkable. Customers occasionally left belongings behind, and David had developed a system for handling forgotten items that involved holding them behind the counter for a few days before donating unclaimed materials to local charities. But as David approached the backpack to move it to his lost and found area, his EOD training activated automatically. 12 years of bomb disposal had conditioned him to notice details that civilian eyes would miss. The weight distribution suggested dense materials. There were small holes that could accommodate wiring, and the placement near the window provided maximum fragmentation effect if detonated. David's pulse quickened as he conducted the same visual assessment he'd performed hundreds of times in combat zones. The backpack's construction was wrong, reinforced seams that suggested blast containment, external pockets positioned to conceal timing devices, and positioning that indicated someone familiar with explosive placement for maximum casualty effect. Using techniques learned from 12 years of EOD operations, David began a covert examination of the suspicious package. He couldn't alarm his customers or create panic, but he needed to determine whether the backpack contained an actual explosive device or was simply an unusual piece of luggage that had triggered his military-trained paranoia. The initial assessment was troubling. David could identify what appeared to be timer components through the backpack's fabric, wire patterns that matched IED construction he'd seen in Afghanistan, and chemical odors that suggested explosive compounds. This wasn't paranoia. This was a genuine improvised explosive device placed in his cafe, threatening every customer currently enjoying their morning coffee. David faced the same kind of life-or-death decision that had defined his military career. He could evacuate the cafe and call police, but that approach risked panic and might trigger a remote detonation if someone was monitoring the situation. Or he could attempt to render the device safe using his EOD training, potentially saving lives but risking his own if the bomb was more sophisticated than his initial assessment suggested. The decision point came when David noticed the timer display through a small gap in the backpack's zipper, 34 minutes and counting down. Whoever had placed this device intended to detonate it during the peak morning rush when Corner Café would be at maximum capacity with customers. David made the same choice he'd made 412 times during his military career. He would attempt to render the explosive device safe, using every skill he'd learned to protect innocent people from bombs designed to kill them. "Folks, I need everyone to move away from the front windows for a few minutes," David announced in the same calm voice he used to offer coffee recommendations. "We're having some issues with the morning sun glare, and I want to adjust the seating arrangement." The customers, trusting David's judgment completely, moved toward the back of the cafe without question. They had no idea their beloved barista was conducting a bomb disposal operation that would determine whether they lived or died in the next 30 minutes. David approached the backpack with the same methodical precision he'd used in combat zones. First priority, identify the trigger mechanism and determine whether the device was victim-operated, timer-controlled, or command-detonated. Second priority, assess the explosive type and determine the appropriate render-safe procedures. Third priority, execute the disarmament without triggering detonation. Through careful examination, David identified the bomb as a timer-controlled device with approximately 15 pounds of homemade explosive material, enough to kill everyone in the cafe and damage the surrounding buildings. The construction was sophisticated, suggesting someone with advanced bomb-making knowledge, but the trigger mechanism followed patterns David had encountered in Iraq. The timer showed 28 minutes remaining. David had defused more complex devices in less time, but never while maintaining the appearance of normal cafe operations with customers present who couldn't be evacuated without risking panic. David began the render-safe procedure, using tools improvised from cafe equipment. A small knife for accessing wire connections, needle-nose pliers borrowed from the espresso machine maintenance kit, and steady hands trained by 12 years of knowing that one wrong move meant death. "David, is everything okay?" asked Mrs. Patterson, who'd noticed his unusual focus on something near the window. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson," David replied, while carefully accessing the bomb's timing mechanism. "Just handling some maintenance issues. How's your cappuccino this morning?" The conversation continued normally while David worked to save every life in the cafe. He identified the primary firing circuit, traced the power source to a concealed battery pack, and began the delicate process of interrupting the timer sequence without triggering the backup detonation systems that sophisticated IEDs often included. With 18 minutes remaining on the timer, David successfully isolated the primary firing circuit, but his EOD training warned him that advanced bomb makers often included secondary triggers designed to detonate if the primary system was tampered with. He needed to check for anti-handling devices before declaring the bomb safe. The secondary examination revealed what David had feared: motion sensors designed to trigger detonation if the device was moved, and a backup timer system that would activate if the primary circuit was interrupted. This wasn't a simple bomb. This was a sophisticated weapon designed by someone who understood counter-EOD techniques. David faced the most complex bomb disposal challenge of his civilian life. With 14 minutes on the primary timer and sophisticated anti-handling devices, he needed to employ advanced render-safe procedures while maintaining normal cafe operations and keeping his customers completely unaware of their danger. The procedure required perfect timing and absolute precision. David systematically defeated each safety system, first the motion sensors, then the backup timer, finally the primary firing circuit. Each step carried the risk of triggering immediate detonation, but David's hands moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd made these same calculations under enemy fire in combat zones. With 6 minutes remaining on the timer, David successfully rendered the explosive device safe. All firing circuits were interrupted, all anti-handling mechanisms were defeated, and the bomb was completely neutralized. The cafe full of customers continued their normal morning routines, completely unaware that their barista had just prevented a bombing that would have killed dozens of people. David carefully removed the now harmless device from the cafe and called the FBI's bomb squad to handle evidence collection and investigation. When federal agents arrived, they found a completely rendered safe IED and a coffee shop full of customers who were confused about why FBI agents were interested in their neighborhood cafe. "Sir, we need to discuss your handling of this explosive device," Special Agent Jennifer Martinez told David during the initial interview. "The render-safe procedures you employed are consistent with advanced military EOD training." David's response was simple and direct. Staff Sergeant David Chen, retired, 52nd EOD Battalion, 12 years explosive ordnance disposal specialist. Agent Martinez reviewed David's military records and bomb disposal techniques. "Sergeant Chen, your actions today prevented what could have been one of the deadliest domestic terrorist attacks in this region's history. The device contained enough explosive to kill everyone in a 2-block radius. The investigation that followed revealed that the bomb had been placed by a domestic terrorist who'd been planning attacks on what he considered liberal gathering places in small communities. David's cafe had been targeted because it served as an informal community center where people from different backgrounds gathered peacefully. But the most important discovery was that David's quick recognition and expert disposal had prevented a tragedy that would have devastated the entire community. The FBI's analysis confirmed that without David's intervention, the bomb would have detonated during peak morning hours when the cafe typically served over 80 customers. The story of the barista's hidden bomb disposal expertise made regional news, but David declined most interview requests. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition. He just wanted to continue serving coffee and maintaining the peaceful community atmosphere that had attracted him to civilian life. However, David's dual identity as cafe owner and bomb disposal expert created new opportunities to serve his community. Local law enforcement began consulting with him on suspicious package protocols, and the FBI invited him to provide training on improvised explosive device recognition for civilian first responders. But the most meaningful recognition came from his customers, who now understood that their neighborhood barista was also their protector. Mrs. Patterson summed up the community's feelings during her next visit. "David, we always knew you made the best coffee in town. Now we know you're also the reason we're alive to drink it." Corner Café continued operating normally, but with an enhanced sense of security. Customers felt safer knowing that someone with David's expertise was watching for threats they'd never recognize. Parents were even more comfortable bringing their children to the cafe, where the nice man who made hot chocolate also happened to be someone trained to recognize and neutralize the most dangerous weapons. 6 months after the incident, David received a letter from the Army EOD community recognizing his actions as exemplifying the values of explosive ordnance disposal service in civilian life. The letter noted that his skills and vigilance had saved innocent lives and reflected the highest traditions of EOD service to community protection. Today, David Chen still operates Corner Café as Millbrook's favorite morning gathering place. He still crafts perfect espresso drinks, still remembers every regular customer's order, and still creates the welcoming atmosphere that makes people want to start their day with a visit to his establishment. But his customers now know that their barista brings more than coffee expertise to his work. He brings the kind of vigilance and protective skills that can recognize threats designed to hurt innocent people. The steady hands that create latte art are also hands trained to render safe the most dangerous weapons. David's story teaches us something important about the nature of service and the different ways that military skills can benefit civilian communities. The EOD specialist, who once defused bombs in combat zones, found a way to continue that protective mission in a civilian coffee shop, creating an environment where people can gather safely while maintaining the vigilance necessary to recognize when that safety is threatened. Sometimes protection comes from defusing roadside bombs under enemy fire. Sometimes it comes from creating warm, welcoming spaces where communities can gather peacefully. Sometimes it comes from recognizing threats that others would miss and neutralizing them before they can hurt innocent people. David Chen learned to provide all three forms of protection, and his community is safer because of it. The barista who used to defuse bombs became the barista who still recognizes them when they threaten his customers. The hands that once cut wires under enemy fire now pull espresso shots in peaceful times, but they never forgot how to recognize the signatures of violence and how to render them harmless. David Chen proved that military service doesn't end with discharge. It evolves into new forms of community protection that keep people safe while they go about their daily lives, completely unaware of the threats that vigilant protectors prevent from ever reaching them.